France had the second largest empire in the world after Great Britain, and when World War I broke out, the sheer scale of the conflict meant that within the first 4 months, France had lost about 500,000 men. As the British did as well, they looked to their colonies to help them with that. They had a very large land empire in West Africa and North Africa. One of the interesting things about all of the colonial powers is the assumption that colonial peoples would willingly serve the mother country. It took more than persuasion to bring some of those troops into the army. The recruitment drives are done by governors and by elites who, I must say, used not necessarily admirable methods. They impose quotas, they impose collective punishments, there's rumors of beatings. Africans are resisting in many ways. They'll deliberately send men who are unfit for service. They will flee. In a few isolated incidences, they have actual riots and they rebel against the colonial authority. About 163,000 French West Africans serve in Europe during the war. Over the course of the war, French casualty rates go down slightly. French West African casualty rates remain high. So there are lots of reasons debated as to why this is the case, but certainly one of them is the use of these troops as cannon fodder at the front. On top of that, French West African troops couldn't go home for leave because it was simply too far. And the fear was that as these troops became more comfortable with ordinary French men and women, that they would start to see the colonial power as more oppressive at home. They are segregated, they are put under surveillance, they are not allowed to leave.
The global nature of the First World War particularly affected the British Empire, of which Canada was an important part in 1914. The British Empire was the largest and most populous the world had ever seen, encompassing a fourth of the world's population: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Newfoundland, India, Africa, Egypt, and South Africa. There were also nearly 500,000 colonial workers directly involved in the war effort. This included 150,000 Chinese workers on the European Western Front.
World War I breaks out about 2/3 of the way through what is often called China's 100 years of humiliation. During this period, China was subject to tremendous imperial pressure to open up its territory, many of its treaty ports, to foreign powers. China lost a number of wars to these imperialist powers, including Great Britain, France, but also Japan. The result of these losses and disasters was that China had to pay huge indemnities to foreign powers. The Chinese were hoping that in entering World War I on the side of the Allies, on the side of Great Britain, France, and Italy, they would, at the end of the war, be able to get this territory back. The northern province of Shandong, where Germany had a concession to commercially do what they wished, and they sent between 100,000 and 175,000 non-belligerents to France, where they served as support for the Allied powers. Many died en route. The conditions were not ideal in Europe, but there were some gains as a result of that experience. Some of the workers who were in France were able to attend literacy schools and actually came back to China in a much better position than when they had left as illiterate laborers.
As the drums of war were being beaten in Europe just before World War I, the Ottoman Empire was already quite engrossed in it. In fact, the Ottomans actually enter the war in 1912 in the Balkans, and they continued to fight until 1922. So really, the war was 10 years. The leadership of the Ottoman Empire was divided. Some counseled for neutrality. Others advised that the Ottomans should ally themselves with Britain and France. But the argument that won the day, eventually, was that the Ottomans should ally themselves with the Germans were winning at the beginning of the war. But the more important reason was that the Ottomans feared Russia. more than any other power. And they were absolutely convinced Russia was going to attack them.
All of the fighting powers have to very rapidly retool their economies to perpetuate the war machine that would keep them going in the war.
The British were especially interested in southern Iraq because just a few years before joining the war, they had converted their entire navy from coal to oil. The Ottomans joined the war on the 2nd of November. On the 6th of November, the British took Basra, the southern part of Iraq, very easily. The British take Basra, they begin to move on to take Baghdad. Midway through, they suffer one of their most humiliating defeats in the war. The British forces fall to the city of Amara, where then they are surrounded for about 120 days, and then the entire British army surrenders. In 1915, Winston Churchill convinced the British cabinet to launch a naval expedition in the peninsula of Gallipoli, which is only a few kilometers away from the capital of Istanbul. And there was this presumption that the Ottomans were the weak link, they would quickly fall apart, the English would just march on triumphantly into Istanbul, put an end to the Ottoman Empire, dismantle it and divide it up, and then use that as a base from which to strike into Europe. The Ottomans fought tooth and nail, and eventually they were victorious. I mean, the British had to abandon this and withdraw, suffering twice as many casualties as the Turks did.